Hi, nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Xu from Maastricht University. I'm a second-year PhD student, and my research area is about sustainability assessment of urban mobility policies. Today, I'm going to give you a presentation of my research, the role of data in sustainability assessment of urban mobility policies. And this presentation contains 5 parts. The first part would be introduction. I will give you a brief background of this research. So nowadays, we know that big data or different types of data play an important role in our daily life. But in urban mobility policy making process, the data collection and interpretation is a typical challenge for the policymakers. And also, sometimes they have data, but the data owned by many different actors. How they can choose the right data and how they can analyze the data is a quite problem or challenge for the urban mobility policymakers. Also, with the appearance of big data, it seems to provide new opportunities for them, like to give them evidence-based policy making, but many governments do not know how to select the most proper data for evaluations. So those are the things that we need to figure it out, and we also need to do some research to help the policymakers to solve these problems. With improved access to both traditional and new types of data, including the survey data, GS data, GPS data, and HHN, they all have the potential to improve evidence-based evaluations of policies regarding the sustainability. But how is this new potential being tapped in policy practice? This is very important because we don't want to only stay this on the research or study level. We want to put or add it into the policy practice. We want to know how the data could help the policymakers to have a better policymaking process. And then does the type of data suits to the intended application? Is big data increasingly employed and found more useful and powerful than traditional survey data? So those are the research questions that we are going to solve in this research. And the objective of this research is to explore and provide recommendations for how the potential use of data in sustainability assessment of urban mobility policy and decision making, which can be better understood and tapped into the urban mobility studies and the policymaking process. Then, in terms of the urban mobility, in 1992, the concept of sustainable mobility first appeared in the EU Green Paper. And then after nearly 20 years, the White Paper acknowledged that still the transport system is not sustainable, and the curbing mobility is not an option. So what should we do? 2 years later, in 2013, since the adoption of the European Commission's Urban Mobility Package, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan concept has been promoted as a strategic planning instrument for local authorities. So since 2013, more and more EU cities began to take the concept of sustainable urban mobility plan into consideration when they designed their own new urban mobility policies. Then in 2016, an urban agenda for the EU was launched in May. It includes a section on urban mobility, which proposes solutions to improve the framework conditions for urban mobility. For sustainability assessment, it's an important tool to do ex-ante policy evaluations, and it also has been regarded as a marriage between the environmental assessment and sustainable development. Actually, there are 4 key policy-making challenges for sustainable urban mobility, which are participation, cooperation, measure selection, and monitoring and evaluation. Obviously, those 4 key policy challenges that can be solved by the sustainability assessment, more or less like the measure selection and monitoring and evaluation, are 2 important steps in sustainability assessment as well. So, as we just said before, generally the sustainability assessment consists 4 steps: problem analysis, finding options, assessment of options, and follow-up. Ideally, the problem analysis should involve data-based evaluation. The second part is data use in urban mobility policymaking. So we reviewed many papers and also the government documents, reports, and then based on that, across the data applications, we identified 4 different types of data that are frequently used in urban mobility studies and policymaking process, which are survey data, statistical data, GIS data, and big data. So for survey data in urban mobility research, it has been largely applied through travel surveys to analyze the motivations and reasons of traveler behaviors in order to stimulate more sustainable mobility behaviors, because the policy makers can know the reasons and the ideas behind the travelers' behaviors to really realize why they want to behave like that, and then they can have a better plans or policy measures to stimulate sustainable urban mobility. For statistical data, in urban mobility studies, it has been widely used by policymakers to assess mobility status and to evaluate the implemented planning and policies. Regarding the GIS data, the main feature of this type of data is that it can provide visual displays, and it has been mostly used to acquire the information of landscapes, streets, public transport lines, and etc. The last one would be the big data. Big data has increasingly played an important role in current urban mobility practice or studies, because the real-time traffic monitoring, traffic congestion regulation, and traffic accident management are the most domains relied on big data. The third part is case studies analysis. There are 22 researches containing concrete case studies has been selected from Web of Science, Scopus, and Google General Research Engine included in the case studies. We cannot give you very detailed information or knowledge of all of these 22 case studies, but we can generalize the pros and cons of each type of data, how it has been used in urban mobility research studies and policymaking process. So the first one would be the survey data. Obviously, As I mentioned before, it can provide you the valuable information and deep insights from different perspectives. But the disadvantage of this type of data is like sometimes you only have a small sample size. And sometimes when you want to use the survey data, you just find out like it's already out of date. For the statistical data, is the most convenient way for policymakers to collect it. And you have so many different sources, and of course it's easy to analyze. You just need to read documents or reports, and then you can understand what is going on, and you don't really need to cost time or spend time to analyze it. But the cons of this type of data is like the resolution of it being relatively low. You can only know a general information based on this type of data. Regarding the GIS data, it provides adequate geo-transport information, including the traffic lines, locations of transport infrastructures, and urban roads networks, both in national and regional scales. You can acquire these maps or data from the internet directly, but you need to have sufficient experience of relevant software use of this type of data, because you need to use some softwares to analyze it. And sometimes you also need to build some models and to combine use this type of data with another type of data to know the overview of the transport information. The GPS data can help you to distill the high-quality data and reveal the real urban mobility behavior of one certain region. But if you only rely on GPS data, it will lead to a data sparsity problem. And of course, the raw GPS data cannot give the information that policymakers need directly. They also need to hire the data analysts to analyze it. In terms of the smart car data, it is the easiest way to reflect urban inhabitants' traveler behaviors. But only rely on it without social activities information cannot thoroughly understand urban mobility pattern in an integrated view. So the mobile phone data actually can be acquired at a lower cost for large scale, and you can also select the frequent users from the samples, which can help policymakers get core information directly and provide high-resolution data for decision makings. But when you use the mobile phone data, the biggest concern would be the privacy issue. You need to get permission of the users first. And then the second thing is that you need to have a sufficient computer science knowledge to establish models for data analysis. The last type is the social media data. The pros of it is that it not only contains location records but also include the purposes of travelers' activities. But you should also take care of this data is that is highly influenced by a certain group of people who are active on social media daily. The fourth part is the discussion. We would like to discuss the potential better use of data in sustainability assessment of urban mobility policies. So you can see the picture left, the policy making cycle, which is the basic one, and based on this one, we will give some recommendation about how to better use different types of data in the whole policymaking process of urban mobility policymaking. So in the agenda setting phase, the historical data collection and processing can be used to define and frame problem. It means any of the 4 types of data may play a role because you want to find some problems, and then based on these problems, you can develop better policies or measures. So it's better for the policymakers to use like survey data to know the motivations or reasons why the travelers behave like that. And they can also use the big data, the mobile phone data, to have a big scale understanding of the traveler patterns in this area. In policy formulation, policy options should be developed. Ex-ante evaluations of implemented policies can be very useful here. Then you can combine the use of big data and survey data, which shows a big potential to explore current travel behaviors and corresponding motivations. Then in decision-making process, an ex-ante assessment of the options should be performed. From the previous research and those 22 case study analysis, we found that gathering GIS data and GPS or mobile phone tracking data processed in ArcGIS software is a very effective way to evaluate and compare different policy options. Also, it's also good for the policymakers, which they can find or they can see the results of different options directly from the GIS map or in the ArcGIS software. The last 2 steps are implementation and policy validation. In these 2 steps, real-time data, including GPS data, mobile phone data, and social media data, can give more in-time reflections of the implemented policies. Then finally, the last part is the conclusion. So from these 22 case studies, despite the surge of attention and availability of open big data, we do not find a shift from traditional data usage to GPS and big data. We can give 2 innovative data use recommendations to the policymakers and urban mobility researchers. The first one would be combined use of different types of available data, both throughout and with the different phases of the policy cycle, shows the biggest potential in practice. And the second one is big data can more easily highlight particular traveler patterns in large number of people and activities, but reveals less about motivation. So traditional surveys remain more useful for this. As I mentioned before, maybe the better way is to combine the use of big data and survey data together to both understand the traveler behaviors, the travel patterns of a certain area, and then you can also know the motivations and reasons why they behave like that. And then you have an integrated view of this, you can make or design a better urban mobility plan or policies. For the future research, from those 22 cases, we found most of them are academic studies, not from actual policy practice, which is a gap that should be addressed by future research, since innovation in policy assessment likely takes place in practice. So we would like to do that in the future because we know the practical policy making is the most important thing, and we need to solve the problem of how to better use the data, different types of data in this process, which is the most important thing that we need to address. Thanks for watching and hope to see you all in September during the conference. If you have any questions, you can just email me or we can discuss later during the conference. Bye.